There has yet to be a book written by Alan Shipnuck that I haven't found just captivating, fascinating, and the newest one is no exception to that. Rory, the heartache and triumph of golf's most human superstar, and you can order it right now. And just in time for the Masters, you can have it in your hot little hands. What a coincidence that is. Alan, how are you?
I'm doing great. Nice to be back here with you, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Was it at the moment that the final putt dropped at the 25 Masters that you thought, time for that Rory book, or was this in the works for longer?
Yeah, well, both. I mean, you could say it's been in the works for 20 years. Been following Rory. I remember his debut at the Open in '07 when he was this, fresh-faced teenager with crazy hair and a beautiful golf swing. So I've been following him, pretty much his entire career. And I decided it's not, I don't want to say like I'm Peter Jackson and this is Lord of the Rings, but it's a little bit of a trilogy. You have the Phil biography, which kind of blew the lid off of everything that was happening behind the scenes with the Saudis, and then I wrote Live and Let Die, which is the whole comprehensive story. And Rory looms large in this whole battle for the soul of professional golf, and he's become more and more interesting as time goes by. The heartbreaks in the majors, certainly. He became a polarizing figure in these tour wars, and so I decided to do the Rory biography spring, summer of 2024, and the goal was to have it done in the fall of 25, so it would come out, around the Masters in 2026. But I my editor at Simon Schuster I've had for a long time. He gives me a lot of latitude. He's like, whatever, buddy, whatever you want. So I wasn't working as hard as I should have. I'm used to the pressure of weekly, daily deadlines, and to have that much runway, I was just kind of farting around. And actually in February of 2025, I wrote to my editor. I said, I'm way behind where I wanted to be. There's no way this book will get done for the fall. I had a guillotine over my neck the last two books. Like, let's just push it back. And he's like, yeah, sure. All I care about is your mental health and da da da. And so when Rory wins the Masters, he sends me a text. He's like, book is due in October. Don't let me down. And but I needed that. I needed that adrenaline. And uh, I had done a lot of interviews. I hadn't done as much typing as I should have, but I already was sitting on a lot of material. And of course, that just turbocharged the whole thing. So it just had to happen the way it did. And it's obviously a great kind of climax of this long, career arc. And so not that Rory's done. He has a lot of good golf in front of him, but to me, it kind of ends the second act of his career, this Masters win and then what happened at the Ryder Cup as well. So it was just the golf gods were on my side, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, we've got a lot to dig into. And to me, one of the most fascinating aspects of this journey to tell the story of Rory is having to do it without him gladly sitting down for an extended interview with you. In fact, one of the quotes that in the foreword to the book that jumped off the page at me is you're on the range, kind of hanging out, talking to his manager, and Rory basically says, "Your presence is bothering me," and you had to relieve the range. So, was there a contentiousness, or is there a contentiousness between the two of you, or does he just want to manage his image a little more carefully than sit down for an interview?
Yeah, more of the latter. I've always had a productive, working relationship with Rory. I mean, the book begins, I'm sitting on a private jet with him flying across China, back in 2012. Like, I've had good access to him here and there. But I've never been one of his boys. He has kind of a tight circle of people in the media. Some of them are Irish, Andy Johnson, the fried egg. A lot of players do have like they're just guys that they're close to because they came up with or because they vibe with. And so I never quite had that with Rory, even though we had some high profile like tweakings and Ryder Cup press conferences and stuff. Like it's always been kind of fun and playful, but yeah, he kind of blew up at me on the range there at Oakmont, and it was a little out of character. I don't want to spoil it for the readers, but it gets a little profane from his end. And but he was in that weird headspace after the Masters win. Like everybody kind of saw it at the PGA Championship and at the US Open. And so I think it was kind of wrong place, wrong time. And yeah, I mean, he basically, so that happened on before the second round. He told me to F off, and I waited for him in the parking lot on Sunday afternoon just to kind of clear the air. And we had a philosophical conversation about the book. Um, and he'd been aware of its presence, but we really hadn't drilled down on it. And I said, "Why is this book bothering you so much?" And he said, "It pisses me off. You're making money off my name." Which, I mean, this is a guy whose earnings were $87 million dollars in the last year. And book money is a tiny, tiny fraction of that. Like, Rory, you're not missing out on much, but it's really not about money. It's about control.
Yeah.
As you said in your question, this guy's life is very stage managed on social media from his blue chip sponsors, everything. Now, when he sits down in front of a microphone, he can be quite candid. That's why people like Rory, but
Yeah.
it's in a controlled environment, or it's with people that he has. There's a certain power dynamic in play where he knows that he can call the shots. And that was not going to be the case with this book. Like, he knows I do things my own way, and I've always been, independent. And so that's unsettling for a guy like Rory because, when he's on the cover of Golf Digest, he tells them what day the interview is, where it's going to happen, who the photographer is going to be, what clothes he wants to wear, what he wants to talk about. And of course, they say yes because they want to get him on the cover. And but it just wasn't going to be like that with me. And so um, that ad, I would have loved to talk to him. Of course, we all know he's a good thinker and he's a great talker. But in some ways, it frees me up because um, if we sat down for a lot of interviews, I'm going to get caught up by his charm and his spin on things. And there's sort of a human element where he's like, "Hey, I just donated this time to you. I expect you to treat me a certain way." And by not having that dynamic, I could just write the book I wanted to write, which was really honest, unflinching, and and sort of the comprehensive story of the man. And
Yeah.
so having a little distance between the reporter and the subject, I think in general is a good thing.
Yeah, I'm curious because there's obviously an affection between Rory and Tiger, whom he idolized, and you talk about that a bit. He was wanting to see how Tiger did things, and I don't know if emulate is the right word, but certainly at least ingest some of the protocols, some of the lessons that he had learned. I'm kind of curious if you think Rory reached that point where he wanted to so desperately wanted to control his messaging. Did that come because of the Masters win, because of a lesson he learned from Tiger, because he got completely lied to and screwed over by Jay Monahan? I mean, was there some breaking point that was like, this is it? I'm not trusting anybody anymore with my story. I'm going to tell it myself.
I don't know if it's fully a lack of trust. I think it's just he's depleted. Throughout the whole battle of LIV Golf, Jay Monahan is hiding out in the $75 million headquarters of the PGA Tour. And he's doing two press conferences a year at the Players Championship, at the Tour Championship. It's just like a total dereliction of duty. And Rory's on the firing lines like every time he tees it up. And he's getting pounded after every round, every press conference. And I and then he sort of got sacrificed at the altar there by Monahan and Yasir and Jimmy Dunn and the guys on the board of directors and that was a very disenchanting moment for him. And he gave so much, and to basically get stabbed in the back, I think that was a real inflection point for him where he's just become much more judicious about how he gives his time and who he's gonna let into his world. And it's not just me. Like, I mean, he used to appear on the No Laying Up podcast all the time. He hasn't been on in years. Like, he's just saying no to a lot of things. And so I didn't take it that personally. It's just kind of where he is. I think the big difference between Rory and Tiger is that Tiger's an introvert and Rory's an extrovert. And so, like, Rory likes people. He likes being around people. He, you see him tournament weeks, he's always got 8 people at his dinner table, and everywhere he moves through the world, he's got friends, and he thrives off of that. Tiger was always awkward and inward, and he never felt comfortable in a crowd, and he just wanted to do his own thing. Neither's right or wrong, but I think if you're going to be a global superstar in sports, it helps to have Rory's personality a little bit more, where you enjoy the energy. But um, yeah, I think it's just um, you know, Rory. and I say this with some affection, he speaks before he thinks,
Yeah.
and it gets him in trouble sometimes. But it's also kind of what we want in our athletes. Like we don't want them to be robotic like Tiger. We want them to be candid, and we want them to give us like good material. Rory does that in excess, but he does have to walk things back. It does get him in trouble. And I think he's realized maybe less is more when it comes to the media and try and stay a little more on message. And so there's a culmination of factors, but I don't think there was one moment per se, but for sure when Jay Monahan went on CNBC and that was, I think, the beginning of Rory saying, okay, I've given all I can give and starting to dial things back.
There is that delicate balance, I guess, between us wanting candid and unfiltered thoughts from our top athletes, and then there's that moment where they say something that at least in print, it looks like it's in the right context. Like, I can do whatever I want now, right? So that phrase coming in the aftermath of the Masters win, well, yeah, I mean, you could have before. From a financial standpoint, Rory's never been limited by resources, at least in the last decade. But to come out and say, I can now do whatever I want, if you're just reading that cold quote, it's a cold quote, right? So,
Yeah.
where do you
And
think he
unfortunately,
is with all of
oh,
that?
yeah, no, I'm sorry to interrupt. I mean, that's also the media age we live in where, you know, when you read what he's saying and that was after I think that was Saturday at Oakmont when he finally talked to reporters, when he said that, and he was kind of making the point like I've been so accessible to the media, to the fans, to the sponsors for so long, and now like I've just given you the greatest gift I can, which was that Masters Sunday no one will ever forget, and the human drama that played out, and I think he's just like, I just don't have as much to give anymore. And now I've earned my place in the pantheon. And Roy's talked about eliminating all of his sponsors, like when his contracts are up, not re-signing with anybody because he doesn't want to give the time to, you know, TaylorMade, to Nike, to Bose, to Omega, whomever it is. Um, like you said, I mean, he's certainly there's no financial imperative. He has a lot of other revenue streams, which I get into in the book. But it's like I think he's rethinking life, and the single most precious commodity he has is time. And so, dialing back with sponsors and with media, it just kind of fits into that. Where like I've given more than any player's given over the last 18 years, um, and now he wants to be a little more focused in how he does things. And I do agree with him. He's kind of earned that right. Like he's said more in his career than of substance and of note and of depth than the other top 50 guys in the world ranking combined. So in some ways, he has earned that right. I agree.
Yeah. Are you surprised then that the amount of time that he's pouring into TGL? I understand he probably has some equity in the whole thing, but you talk about time. This is way different than going on a one-day photo shoot for Bose or attending a corporate outing twice a year for TaylorMade or whatever it is. This is a pretty consistent commitment during the season. Is that one that you expect to last long term?
Yeah, I mean, he does. He's the co-owner, so he has more imperative than anybody, along with Tiger, to to see this thing through. And it's a little different. Rory's always had this big picture. He was really the first superstar who came of age in the social media era. He was an incredible presence on Twitter in the early years, and he toned it down. But he's a very online. What is he, a millennial? I guess so. Is he a Zoomer? That'd be embarrassing if he was. But um, he's just he's always been trying to make golf younger and cooler because he came up and it was still he was competing against Fred Funk and guys like that. I mean, he's spanned multiple generations now, and so he's been digital in a very analog world, and I think that he sees the TGL as something fun, like that the people he hangs out with in South Florida who are in their 20s and 30s might be into. And so That's in a little different category because there's so much talk about growing the game. I mean, Rory sincerely feels like the game does need to evolve, and it's an interesting bit. It's in the book too when the Premier Golf League was founded really in 2018, and that became the precursor to LIV Golf. Rory was a supporter of the Premier Golf League initially, at least intellectually. He never signed up, but he met with the leadership and said, "I think this is great. This is what golf needs. It needs to be refreshed. It needs something that's a little more consumable. That's a little jazzier product." And so he's always had that vision. So I think the TGL is actually quite consistent with the way he's talked about golf needing to change. At the same time, he is a traditionalist when it's kind of like there's this binary thing with Rory where he's very old school in how he thinks about top flight professional competitive golf. And he doesn't want that to change at all. He wants to he wants to play the same game, the same courses as the old timers. But he does see as a businessman, as a steward of the game, like we also have to meet people where they are. And so there's kind of a room for both in his mind, and he's trying to champion both approaches to keeping people engaged.
Yeah, what would you say is the number one reason Rory didn't take the money from Liv and run?
Because even before Liv was founded, when the Saudi International became a stop on the European tour and they were paying out huge appearance fees, he refused to go. And he said, his quote was 100% there's a morality to it. I mean, he was a UNICEF ambassador when he was very young in 2011, and he went to Haiti to visit it after the earthquake. And so he felt like that the money was tainted and he didn't want it. And that was Arnold Palmer's position in 1994 when Greg Norman tried to launch this world tour. And Rory knows that story and he venerates Palmer. And I think he wanted to be on, he said it, I want to be on the right side of history. And so preserving the legacy of the PGA Tour, preserving the major championships and kind of the long history of the sport is very important to him. And I think he saw Liv as a threat, and he was probably correct about that.
Hmm. Man, there's like 500 stories in this book that I would just we could do a deep dive podcast on every one of them. In fact, at some point, you probably will, in whatever ecosystem you're involved with. And I got to dive into a couple of them with you.
Please.
I was in Chicago at Medinah for the Ryder Cup, and during that weird time where Rory got his time zone wrong, and as you tell the story in the book, yes, the time zone was wrong, and yes, there was the police escort, but there was also some winks and nods amongst some of the people working behind the scenes, like perhaps it wasn't all alarm clock related.
Yeah.
Alan, give me the highlight reel of the Medina lateness Rory story.
I mean, it's always been an urban legend, and that's one of the fun things about doing these biographies is, I did it with Mickelson, and I did it with Rich Beam before that. Like, there's folklore, and you get to dive in it and find out like what really holds up, and what is real and what is not. And so, I talked to a lot of people who were involved in that Ryder Cup behind the scenes, and I kept hearing that Rory was really infatuated with this woman who was working for the PGA of America, and she was at the transportation desk. Like she was sort of checking the players in and out, helping to get them from their hotel to the golf course, in the suburbs of Chicago. And that woman was Erica Stoll, who's now Rory's wife. And so they according to everybody, Rory was flirting with her like mad throughout the whole week, and it became this talking point among the tournament staffers, like, what's going on with Rory and Erica? And then, of course, he's late for Sunday singles, and no one can reach him, and it's this whole thing. And again, this is the challenge. Like there's only two people who could ever say definitively if there was some hanky panky that helped get Rory, off track on that Ryder Cup Saturday night. They're not talking, but there was enough people who were close to the situation who were, and so their voices are in the book. And I leave it ambiguous because it has to be, but it's a fun backstory to the whole thing. And the fact is they they started dating 6 or 7 months after that. Like clearly there was a spark, and exactly the exact role it played in Rory almost missing his tee time and costing Europe the Ryder Cup. Um, I'll leave that up to the reader's imagination.
I'm still trying to figure out why the Chicago PD felt so motivated to get him there. So
Yeah.
quickly that
I
riding
mean,
up on sidewalks and through crowds and things. That's pretty elaborate.
that's the crazy thing because the hotel was 12.2 miles away from the golf course. And this cop from the Lombard, that's the little suburb, the Lombard PD got Rory there in 16 minutes on with Ryder Cup gridlock. I mean, it's got to be one of the all-time great pieces of driving in the history of,
Oh, yeah.
law enforcement. He was calling ahead and having, roads closed and exits cleared and because yeah, if Rory had been late to his tee time, he would have had to forfeit the first hole. If he'd been more than 10 minutes late, he would have forfeited the match. That's what's in the rule book. Now, Keegan Bradley, his opponent, said I wouldn't have accepted a forfeit, but I don't know if he had that authority.
Right. What are you going to do? Just turn the
And
point down? You can't do it. You can't reschedule
yeah,
the match.
and the Europe, they were the miracle at Medinah. I mean, they had no room for error. So it could have been one of the biggest screw ups in the history of golf. But in classic Rory fashion, he saunters up, he hits a few putts, eats a power bar, and he goes out and he whoops Keegan. Like it just adds to the legend.
Without warming up. Who would have ever guessed that major golf moments would be so deeply impacted by law enforcement here in the last this part of this generation of, between Scheffler and Rory? And
Yeah.
I don't know what to expect for this year. Hopefully, it's
Don't don't
nothing.
forget Robert Allenby in Hawaii.
Okay, yeah. So this isn't in the book, but let's just take a second. For those of you who aren't aware, Allenby went out in somewhere in Hawaii and just got the tar beat out of him and then claimed that he was mugged, robbed, and all of that. I don't know that very many people have bought that story. What happened to Robert Allenby?
Yeah, it didn't stand up to scrutiny.
No,
It seems that there was probably a woman involved, and um, it was late at night, and there was probably some drinking, and yeah, his face tells the story of what happened next. But
didn't go well.
uh, unfortunately, he kind of impugned the citizens of Honolulu, this and yeah, there was a lot of reporting that went into that, and his story did not quite hold up.
No, it did not. Fly forward with me to the Masters, and you do such a great job of walking us through how it all unfolded, the drama, and one of the things that I most appreciated is the input from other players who were watching either on the premises at Augusta or watching on TV and describing for you in the book how much they cried. Now, there's one version of that which is I absolutely love that guy. He's like a brother to me. He was there when my kids were sick. He did this and then there's the part that as a professional golfer who has beat my head against the wall so many times, I just have this deep appreciation for what it took for him to get to that point. Now everybody's flashing back to 2010 or 2011 where he's hit the ball into the cabins on the left and has his head down on his driver and has just completely collapsed all the way to, 15 years later. What was the emotional heartstring that his Masters win pulled on guys who are normally his competitors?
Yeah, it just transcended sport. I mean, if this book was fiction, you couldn't come up with a more incredible build up. You have this quest. I mean, Rory was such a phenom. He wins the four majors right out of the box, a couple in blowout fashion. He's on pace with Jack and Tiger, and it looks like he's gonna have one of the greatest careers we've ever seen. And then there's this decade long fallow period where he's still playing at an incredibly high level and he's winning all over the world and FedEx Cups and Race to Dubai's and Players Championships and Ryder Cups, but the tournaments he wants the most. I mean, you're getting into Shakespeare. You're leaving the sports page. You're getting into the Greek, chorus, um, and then the way it all played out on that Sunday, the highs and lows. He hit some of the greatest shots in Masters history and some of the worst, and it was beyond golf. it was just raw human emotion. And could this guy hold it together when it was so tantalizingly close?
Mm.
And, you know, why did it have such an emotional punch? It wasn't because he won the career slam. I mean, that's cool. And that added weight to it, but it was just the way it played out on his face. And that walk from the 18th green to the scores tent when you could see this unburdening and this weight lifted and the hug, he's crying into his daughter's shoulder and um he's just it was just such a moment because ultimately sports only matters because it's played by humans, like when Ben Crenshaw doubles over on the last green at Augusta, it's because, his swing coach and lifelong mentor had just died and he had just been a pallbearer a few days earlier. It wasn't because he won his second Masters, and it was because of the backstory. When Phil wins for Amy when she has cancer, the hug with Tiger and Earl, and then Tiger and Charlie. Like you've been on this journey with these people, and you followed them, and they've enriched your life, and they've brought you joy, and you probably lost money betting on them in your fantasy, league, and you've bought their clothes or their clubs, and you spent incalculable hours, rooting for them or against them. Like you're just so invested, and um, it's not it. There's just this human dimension, and golf is the most dramatic of all that because there are no teammates. There was nowhere for Rory to hide out there. In the 13th fairway, he couldn't pass the ball to a teammate and go hide in the corner. It was like he had to hit the shots, um, and then it's just the thrilling drama of tournament golf where it's just dead quiet and the ball is just sitting there mocking you, and the battle is entirely internal because it's the same guy. You think about the pitch that he played on the third hole that was all world to get the lead back from Bryson. You think about obviously that slinging hook at 15, like that shot on 17, some of the 5 iron into number 4, which might be the hardest hole at Augusta National. Like he hit some of the best shots you'll ever see a player hit under pressure. So he can do it. It's not he has the physical tools, but then the duff chip into the creek, the whiff in the putt on 15, hitting it into the bunker on 18 in regulation, missing a 4-footer to win the Masters. Like that's not a physical challenge. That is metaphysical. And um, it was just so gripping to watch him battle these demons and then for him to do it and the catharsis that followed. I mean, you don't have to love golf, you don't have to love Rory, but it was really hard not to be moved by the whole thing.
That's so well put. The book is called Rory, The Heartache and Triumph of Golf's Most Human Superstar. We'll put a link to it in the notes so that you can just click there and go and get it. Believe me, folks, this is one of those where you're going to sit down and read it and just cancel all your other appointments for a few hours. It's really good, as everything that Alan does is. At some point, let's catch up on just the world of golf in general and talk about all the weird things that are happening. The tour is reshaping its
Yeah.
direction and existence, and the Rorys of the world are going to enjoy it, and the guys who are not the Rorys of the world are going to be looking for work and places to play, and so we have a
Yeah.
lot we can dig into. But thank you for the time and for talking about the book and kind of giving us a little taste of it.
Yeah, always a pleasure. I'm happy to reconnoiter whenever you want, Bill.